just hours into my sister-in-law's wedding day. I had suffered an attack of acute appendicitis in the middle of the night that resulted in emergency surgery. I was lying in a hospital bed, freshly stitched up and barely conscious. When my mother-in-law burst into my room, she started screaming at me, and then she actually began to hit and press down with all her weight on the fresh open wound on my abdomen. At that exact moment, hearing my screams of pure agony, my husband sprinted out of the adjoining bathroom, grabbed his own mother by the hair, and hurled her onto the hospital's linoleum floor. It was the desperate counterattack of a man willing to sever his own blood ties to protect his wife, and from that day forward, the miserable absolute downfall of my mother-in-law began. Let me take you back to the beginning of this story of poetic justice. Hi, my name is Emily. I'm 38 years old, a working mom living in Seattle with my 5-year-old daughter, Lily. I can tell this story now with a smile and a sense of peace. But a few years ago, I never imagined my life would turn into a melodrama crazier than a daytime soap opera. It all started like this. Once I crossed the threshold into my 30s, I genuinely didn't have much desire to get married. I was too busy trying to climb the corporate ladder at my firm. And before I knew it, all my friends were already mothers, leaving me feeling like the only one who had fallen behind. That's when an old college roommate insisted on setting me up with a guy who worked as a CPA at her husband's firm. At first, I flat out refused, but she showed me a picture and said, "Emily, this guy is an absolute catch. If you let him slip away, you're going to regret it." The man in the photo was wearing an impeccable button-down shirt and had incredibly kind eyes. Almost as if hypnotized, I agreed to the blind date. On the agreed-upon day, I walked into an upscale coffee shop in Bellevue. A man rose elegantly from a window table and greeted me with a polite nod. He was much taller and even more handsome in person. His initial impression hit me so hard that I found myself gripping the strap of my purse tightly without realizing it. As we sat down and started chatting, I noticed his voice was soft, but his words carried an unusual depth. He told me naturally that his name was Alex, that he was a corporate auditor, that he loved to read, and that he lived entirely independent of his parents. As I listened to him, I crossed my legs, narrowed my eyes slightly, and discreetly analyzed him. To be completely honest, I was suspicious at first. It made zero sense for a man this perfect to still be single at our age. His looks, his career, the way he spoke, even the gentle way he set his coffee mug back on the saucer. He seemed to have no flaws, and that actually gave me the chills. I was convinced he was hiding some fatal defect, maybe a terrible temper or some massive family drama. So I cut to the chase and asked him, "A great guy like you, how are you still single?" He smiled faintly, shrugged, and replied, "I guess I just haven't had the best luck with fate." I didn't miss the fleeting shadow of sadness that crossed his eyes when he said it. At the time, I let it go. But looking back, that was my very first clue of what the future held. From that day on, our relationship flowed incredibly naturally. He was never late for a date. If I had to work overtime at the office, he'd be waiting outside the building with a hot panini and a latte, so I'd have something for dinner. Unlike my ex-boyfriends, who would raise their voices at the slightest disagreement, Alex was the type to speak less, and with more calmness the more tense things got. I fell completely in love with that temperament. When I'd get home from our dates, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, just smiling to myself. I was head over heels. Right around our 1-year anniversary it happened. I had been feeling bloated and dealing with morning sickness for days. I went to CVS thinking it was a stomach bug, but the pharmacist looked me up and down and suggested with a knowing look that I buy a pregnancy test. I went back to my apartment, went to the bathroom, and saw the 2 pink lines. I sat on the edge of the tub, staring at the plastic stick in utter shock. A mix of sheer terror and explosive joy washed over me, my heart pounding 1,000 miles a minute. That same night, I carefully broke the news to Alex. He jumped up from his chair and hugged me with all his might. With tears in his eyes, he placed a trembling hand on my stomach, and his voice cracking told me it was the greatest gift of his life. Seeing him like that completely erased any lingering anxiety I had. Right then and there, he proposed we moved the wedding up by 6 months. He took care of everything from booking the venue to handling the mortgage paperwork for our new condo, treating me like I was made of fragile glass. However, just 2 months before the wedding, something happened. It was a stormy night. One of those torrential Seattle downpours where it feels like the whole sky is caving in. Was resting on the couch after a late shift when the buzzer rang aggressively. On the intercom camera, I saw Alex completely soaked, no umbrella, leaning heavily against the brick wall. Alex, who usually got flushed after half a craft beer, reeked of bourbon and was swaying on his feet. Terrified, I buzzed him in, got him inside, and started drying his hair with a towel. He collapsed onto the living room floor, grabbed my hands, pressed his forehead against them, and began to sob uncontrollably. It was the first time I'd ever seen a grown, successful man cry like a lost child. Not knowing what else to do, I just rubbed his back. After a long while, he lifted his head and with a raspy-voiced voice said, "Emily, I've been hiding something from you. What is it? Tell me slowly," I replied. 2 years ago, a month before I was supposed to get married, my wedding was called off. Hearing that, I felt my stomach drop, but strangely, instead of shock, I felt a cold wave of relief. It was like a puzzle piece snapping into place. Ah, so this was the catch. I hid my reaction, brushed his wet bangs from his forehead, and asked him to explain. The story, he confessed, wiping his tears with his soaked sleeves, was much heavier than I could have imagined. The reason for the breakup had been none other than his mother. Ever since the initial meet the parents' dinner, his mother had relentlessly criticized his fiancé's college degree, demanded to see her bank statements, and even insisted on being given a spare key and the alarm codes to the newlyweds' future home. The girl's family couldn't take it anymore, and they pulled the plug on the whole thing. Alex hadn't been able to stop his mother or defend his partner. He just stood there as a passive spectator and let his fiancée walk out of his life. Hearing that made my blood run cold. He gripped my hands tightly, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "I won't do the same thing this time. No matter what happens, I am on your side. Whatever my mother says, I will be your shield. I promise you." Seeing the sheer desperation in his eyes, I decided to trust him. But at the same time, I felt an overwhelming urge to see exactly what kind of family I was dealing with. I wasn't going to run away, not for the baby growing inside me, and not for the man I was going to share my life with. That night, I tucked him in with a heavy blanket, went to the kitchen, brewed some chamomile tea, and gathered my courage. A few days later, I informed him, "I'm going to meet your parents alone." He looked at me in a panic and asked why. I touched his shoulder and smiled. "If I go with you, they'll all be wearing masks. I have to go alone to see your mother's true face." He hesitated terribly, but eventually nodded. He begged me 1,000 times to call him if anything went south. Seeing his face so fraught with anxiety only made me more resolute. I was ready to untangle the knot in this man's life. After setting a date to visit my future in-laws, I spent several nights tossing and turning. I scoured Reddit threads about toxic mothers-in-law, analyzed different personality disorders, and rehearsed my responses so I wouldn't come off as rude, but also wouldn't look weak. I'd rub my belly and whisper to my baby, "Mommy's going to protect you. Don't worry." When the day finally arrived, my hands were freezing, but there was a burning fire in my chest. The night before, I had tried on about a dozen outfits. If I dressed too sharp, I'd look arrogant. If I dressed too casual, I'd look cheap. Since my baby bump was just starting to show, I didn't know whether to hide it or accentuate it. I finally settled on a tasteful knee-length beige dress, a tailored cardigan, and a simple gold chain. While applying my makeup in the mirror, my hands were shaking so much I messed up my lipstick twice. That morning, Alex handed me a box of gourmet artisanal chocolates to bring as a gift and looked at me with deep concern. He offered to take the morning off work to come with me, but I just straightened his tie and gave him a brave smile. "Relax, I've got a backbone. You know, nobody pushes me around at the firm." He kissed my forehead and begged me again to call at the slightest issue. I left his nervous gaze behind and ordered an Uber to his parents' neighborhood in Queen Anne. Standing in front of their classic Victorian-style home, my finger hovered, paralyzed over the doorbell for several seconds. I felt like a law student about to take the bar exam. I took a deep breath and rang it. The door opened and my father-in-law, Arthur, welcomed me with a warm smile. He patted my shoulder twice, invited me in, and joked that his son had excellent taste. In that moment, the tension deflated just a bit. At least I'd have someone on my side in this house. But then I saw my mother-in-law, Catherine, sitting rigidly on the living room sofa, and the hair on the back of my neck stood up, contrasting with Arthur's friendly face. Hers was made of solid ice. She looked me up and down with the cold, calculating stare of an appraiser valuing cheap merchandise. I stepped forward to offer a polite hug, but she didn't even return the greeting. She merely gestured with her eyes to the armchair across from her. As soon as I sat down, she pulled out 8 old leather-bound accounting ledgers and slammed them onto the coffee table with a loud thud. They had years written in Sharpie on the worn covers. I blinked at her, completely confused. She opened one of them and started tracing her manicured finger down the lines. "Do you know what this is? This is every single cent I have spent on my son's private schools, his tutors, and his college tuition. Nothing is missing. These are my years of sacrifice to turn my son into a successful CPA." I felt the fingertips holding my teacup turn to ice, but I kept my smile plastered on. What she said next was even worse. She declared that these ledgers were her shares in her son, and that I, as her future daughter-in-law, needed to understand the weight of that investment. I had a sudden, wild urge to burst out laughing, but I didn't let a single emotion cross my face. Instinctively, I knew that if I showed weakness, I'd lose the war. Then came the final blow. She mentioned she had looked up my firm and asked me point-blank what my annual salary was, making a snide comment about the economy being tough. When I cautiously gave her a ballpark figure, she scoffed and blurted out that I didn't even make half of what her son did, and then she handed down her sentence. "When you two get married, I have no intention of losing what is mine. My son will manage the finances under my supervision, and you will wire me $800 a month to compensate for my loss. It is the absolute minimum you owe me for taking my boy away." Hearing that, the teacup trembled slightly in my hands. I watched the amber liquid ripple. I took a small sip to clear my throat, and with a soft but unwavering smile replied, "Catherine, I believe financial matters are something Alex and I need to decide together, as a married couple. It's too delicate a subject for me to agree to on my own right now. We'll discuss it at home and let you know." I didn't miss the slight twitch in her eye when she heard my answer. But I wasn't going to cave. Arthur quickly intervened to change the subject and ask about the baby, saving the afternoon from a total meltdown. When I left the house and walked down the steps to wait for my ride, I realized my back was drenched in a cold sweat. But oddly enough, instead of fear, I felt my fighting spirit awaken. I made a silent vow to bring order to this family. When I got home, I told Alex everything that had happened, not sparing a single detail. As he listened, his face turned crimson with rage, and he ended up punching the armrest of the couch. He hugged me and apologized 1,000 times. I rubbed his back, let out a dry laugh, and told him that instead of apologizing, we needed to strategize. That night, we sat at the dining room table and mapped out our battle plan. A few days later, we invited Arthur out for coffee, just the 3 of us. We explained the ledgers and the demand for the $800, and asked for his advice on how to handle it. My father-in-law, who had witnessed the whole thing, let out a deep, heavy sigh before I even finished speaking. "I am so sorry I didn't stop her in that moment. You two do whatever you feel is fair for your own household. I'll handle the rest," he told us, giving us his blessing. We sent a very polite text message to Catherine. We told her we would send her $300 a month as a gesture of appreciation, but we simply couldn't give her more. Not even 10 minutes passed before Alex's phone started ringing off the hook. He answered it. Catherine's hysterical screaming flooded our living room through the speaker. Alex looked at me, and I backed away toward the couch, giving him an encouraging nod. It was his turn. At first his voice trembled, but the longer he spoke, the firmer he became. He made it crystal clear that we set the rules in our house, and no matter how loud she yelled, the decision was final. Seeing his profile, so strong and resolute, actually brought tears to my eyes. The man who had stood by silently while his first wedding was destroyed was now acting as my absolute shield. From that day on, Catherine's attacks shifted tactics. She couldn't complain about money anymore, so she went after my looks. If I gained a little pregnancy weight, she'd call just to tell me I was going to be fat forever. She asked for the baby's clothing sizes, but all she ever mailed us were cheap knockoffs from flea markets. When I politely thanked her, she'd attack me, calling me an ungrateful snob who didn't know how to appreciate nice things. Waking up to 5 missed calls from her became my daily routine. Honestly, dealing with that while heavily pregnant was exhausting, but I didn't have the time or energy to waste my emotions on her. To keep her poison from infecting me, I bulletproofed my mind. Whenever I did answer the phone, I'd use a sickeningly cheerful voice. "Oh yes, Catherine. Wow, really? That's great. I'll totally keep that in mind." I just let her words go in one ear and out the other. At first, Alex watched me with concern, but soon that concern morphed into profound admiration until one day, Arthur came to visit while Alex was at work. He brought a small, crisp white envelope. He sat on our couch, took a sip of water, and placed the envelope in my hands. Inside was a bank statement showing a wire transfer. "Let me make this right," he said softly. I looked at him startled, and he patted my hand. "Let me compensate you on behalf of my wife. I am so deeply sorry, sweetheart. This is strictly for you two to start your family off right. You don't need to explain it to anyone." He had transferred $80,000 into our joint account. Hearing that, my hands shook so violently I couldn't form a sentence. Arthur stood up in silence and put his coat on. Seeing his hunched, sorrowful back broke my heart. I grabbed his arm in the hallway and burst into tears. His eyes welled up too. He patted my shoulder twice and left quietly. I locked the money away in a drawer and sat on the couch, feeling a complex mix of intense gratitude and a very dark premonition. The balance in this family was so fragile. I had no idea how long the peace would last, and that premonition became reality not long after, coming from a totally unexpected direction. While we maintained this tense truce, I gave birth to my beautiful daughter, Lily. Between counting her tiny toes and spending sleepless nights nursing her with massive bags under my eyes, I tried to completely ignore my in-laws. Thankfully, Catherine seemed to calm down a bit with the birth of her granddaughter. Of course, it wasn't real peace. It was just the eye of the hurricane before the next storm. Though I didn't know it at the time, the trigger was my father-in-law. After retiring and spending all day cooped up in the house, he was diagnosed with high cholesterol and pre-diabetes that spring. His doctor prescribed at least an hour of walking a day. So, he decided to join a local seniors hiking club that did weekend trails up in the Cascades. Alex and I were thrilled. Finally, after a lifetime of enduring his wife's constant nagging, Arthur was going to get out and breathe some fresh mountain air. A few months later, when we went over to visit, my jaw practically dropped. He had lost his beer belly, had a healthy tan, and walked with an incredible new agility, looking a decade younger. Alex was so moved to see his dad smiling like that after so many years. But there was someone watching this transformation with deep, burning suspicion. Catherine would stand with her arms crossed, glaring as her husband laced up his hiking boots, dropping venomous comments. "Why is this man suddenly looking so young? What's up on that mountain that he needs to dress up for?" I just laughed it off, assuming she was feeling a little insecure and jealous. But the one who threw gasoline on the fire was my sister-in-law, Brittany. This girl, who was in her early 30s, still single, and happily living off her parents' credit cards, sent a YouTube link to the family group chat. The title of the video belonged in a museum of stupidity, scandals, and cheating and hiking clubs. Brittany followed the link with a bunch of crying, laughing emojis, texting, "Mom, Dad, better watch out for this stuff." Haha. As soon as I saw the link, a chill ran down my spine, and just as I feared, starting that very night, my mother-in-law turned into a completely different person. Every time Arthur pulled his fleece jackets or REI gear out of the closet, she'd block the bedroom door. Why are you wearing that new shirt? Who are you trying to impress? How many women go on these little field trips? She'd interrogate him relentlessly until Arthur, utterly exhausted, just stopped answering her. That silence only fed her paranoia. She concluded that if he wasn't answering, he was hiding something, and the situation at their house became unbearable. The worst part happened a few weekends later. Arthur posted a photo in the family WhatsApp group of himself at a scenic overlook, having asked a passing hiker to snap the picture. The comment Catherine left under the photo is something I will never ever forget. Who took this picture for you? Give me her name right now. I nearly fell off my chair when I read it. It was like something out of a dark comedy. Alex stared at his phone screen, rubbed his temples, and let out a miserable sigh. From that day forward, Catherine practically lived on her cell phone. She started calling Alex at work right in the middle of tax season 10, 20 times a day, repeating the exact same demand. Track your father's iPhone. You work with computers and audits. You can track him. You can't even do this one simple thing for your own mother. No matter how many times Alex explained that tracking someone's phone without their consent was illegal and completely insane, it didn't register. One afternoon, Alex, hiding in a bathroom stall at his corporate office, finally exploded. He yelled so loudly that Lily and I got scared hearing him through the receiver at home. "Mom, if you don't trust Dad that much, go follow him up the damn mountain yourself. Stop calling me. I'm going to get fired because of you." Hands shaking, he blocked his mother's number. I hugged him from behind when he got home, saying nothing. I could see him crumbling under the weight of her insanity. But human nature is terrifying. Once she lost her son as an outlet, Catherine's sights locked onto me. I was on maternity leave, home with the baby all day, and she called to issue my next set of orders. "Emily, this weekend you are going to follow your father-in-law. You can just push the baby in the stroller, wait for him at the light rail station, follow him to the trailhead, and take pictures of whoever he meets." I was literally speechless at the sheer stupidity of the request. She wanted me to go on a covert espionage mission to the mountains with a newborn infant. I controlled my tone and replied, "Catherine, why on earth would I spy on Arthur's private life? I am absolutely not doing that." Her banshee screams echoed out of the phone speaker, but I just calmly pressed end call. I walked over to the window rocking my baby and watched the sunset over the Seattle skyline. I felt it deep in my bones. The dynamics in this family were spiraling totally out of control. If before she was an overbearing mother-in-law, now she was a full-blown sickness. The climax arrived shortly after during a family lunch. It was Arthur's birthday, so we were obligated to go to their house. And Brittany was there, too. I was in the kitchen, helping prepare some appetizers, while Alex and his dad watched the Seahawks in living room. Suddenly, I saw Brittany whispering something to my daughter, Lily, who was playing on the rug near her. I leaned out of the kitchen slightly, a spatula still in my hand, to listen. I will never forget what my ears picked up. "Listen, sweetie. Auntie will give you a crisp $10 bill if you go sneak the cell phone out of Grandpa's pocket without him noticing." "Okay." I froze, gripping the handle of the spatula so hard my knuckles turned white. My blood was boiling, roaring in my ears. Using a little girl, her own niece, as a pawn to steal a phone, they had crossed an unforgivable line. But the one who reacted before I could was Alex. I don't know how he heard her whisper over the noise of the TV broadcast, but he shot up from the couch like a coiled spring and towered over his sister. He pulled Lily behind him and growled, low and dangerous. "What did you just say to her? Repeat it." Brittany rolled her eyes and let out a nervous, breathy laugh. "Alex, chill out. Oh my God, it's a joke." In that moment, Alex unleashed every ounce of rage he'd been swallowing for years. He raised his voice with so much fury, I thought he was going to flip the dining table. Catherine came running out of the kitchen, terrified, screaming, "What's going on?" And that was when Alex dropped a bomb even I wasn't expecting. "It's over. The $25,000 I was going to give you for your wedding gift. Forget it." As of today, it's canneled. Why the hell would I give money to an aunt who uses my daughter as a tool for her psychotic games? The living room turned to ice. Brittany, turning purple with rage, started stomping her feet, screaming that he was crazy. Catherine grabbed Alex by his shirt sleeve, shaking him and shrieking over the chaos. I just leaned against the kitchen door frame, holding my daughter tight against my chest. I could feel Lily's little heart racing against me. And right then, I made a decision. We couldn't keep pretending this was a normal family anymore. An icy premonition ran down my spine. A massive tidal wave was coming to wipe everything out. In the car ride home, Alex didn't say a single word. I just stared out the window, holding my sleeping daughter's hand. At a red light, Alex rested his forehead against the steering wheel and let out a choked sob. I pretended not to hear him. I knew the storm that was ravaging my husband's heart. We spent several days in a heavy, oppressive silence at home. Alex barely spoke when he got back from work, and I didn't push him. I just served him hot dinners and sat with him. At night, when the baby was asleep, he'd go out to the balcony to stare at the city lights, and I'd quietly brew him some coffee. I didn't dare ask how he felt dealing with such a tangled mess of emotions. On a Tuesday morning, while I was packing Lily's daycare backpack, my mother-in-law called. I looked at the caller ID, sighed deeply, and answered. She sounded like she was dying, sobbing uncontrollably. "Emily, please help me. I was going to the bathroom. I twisted my ankle and I can't move. Arthur went up to the mountains again and I'm all alone in the house on the floor." My heart twisted. As awful as she was to me, she was an elderly woman, and she was hurt. I couldn't just ignore it. I dropped Lily off at daycare in a rush, grabbed my car keys, and drove straight to her house in Queen Anne. While driving, I was mentally mapping out the fastest route to the nearest ER and trying to remember if I had ice packs in the freezer. I was such a fool. When I arrived at her building, I rang the bell and the door flew open immediately. What I saw left me petrified. My mother-in-law didn't have a bandage or a cast on her ankle. She was standing perfectly upright, hair blown out, wearing heavy makeup, a silk scarf, and clutching a designer handbag. I just stared at her for a few seconds before I could even open my mouth. She shoved me aside and marched briskly toward the elevator. "What are you waiting for? Hurry up, get to the car. Your father-in-law just caught a taxi downstairs. Follow that cab." Then it all clicked. The twisted ankle, the frantic emergency call. It was all a filthy, calculated lie, just to use me as her chauffeur and bloodhound in her insane stalking mission. I stared at her back as she marched toward the parking garage, squeezing my car keys so hard my nails dug into my palms. If I exploded right there, she would flip the script and tell everyone I was a disrespectful, abusive daughter-in-law. But if I went with her, I'd be officially complicit in her madness. As the elevator descended to the garage, I quickly calculated how to shut this down permanently. We reached my SUV. Catherine, assuming we were speeding off, pulled open the passenger door and climbed in. I got into the driver's seat and turned on the engine. But instead of putting it in drive, I hit the central lock button on my door panel. Clack! The heavy sound of all four locks engaging echoed inside the cabin. She midway through buckling her seatbelt, side-eyed me. Without taking my eyes off the concrete wall in front of me, suppressing a tidal wave of fury, I spoke. "Catherine, get out. Excuse me. I am not driving you anywhere today." I saw out of the corner of my eye how her face contorted. Turning violently red, she started screaming, "How dare you, you little brat! Start this car right now." But I raised my voice over hers, cold as liquid nitrogen. "Do not ever use me or Alex as a shield to justify your baseless paranoia against your husband ever again. I am your son's wife. I am not your hunting dog." Her jaw dropped open, unable to form a coherent sentence. I unlocked the doors and pointed a stiff finger toward the exit. She tried to sputter out another insult, but huffing like a cornered animal, she opened the door and stepped out. The second her foot hit the pavement, I locked the doors again, threw it in reverse, and peeled out of the spot. I watched in the rearview mirror as her figure grew smaller and smaller, standing completely alone in the dark, damp garage. Oddly enough, I didn't shed a single tear. I was shaking, yes, but a huge part of me felt incredibly, profoundly liberated. When I got home, I curled up on the couch, replaying her stunned face in my head. I decided not to tell Alex anything just yet. It was too heavy a burden for him on a random Tuesday. But that same night, around 9:00 p.m., Alex's phone rang aggressively. It was Arthur. As soon as Alex answered, I knew something was horribly wrong. My father-in-law's voice, usually so calm and grounded, came through the speaker, completely broken, trembling with humiliation. "Son, I am dying of shame today. I can't even lift my head. Your mother," she called all the wives of the men in my hiking club. The story was a nightmare. Arthur and his trail buddies were having some craft beers and wings at a local pub in a small mountain town after their descent. Out of nowhere, one of the guys' cell phones rang. It was his wife, absolutely frantic, saying some crazy older woman had just called her screaming, "I know what's going on. Tell your husband to leave mine alone, you whore." Right after that, another guy's phone rang, and then another. Catherine had somehow gotten her hands on the hiking club's emergency contact roster and had systematically called every single member's wife to aggressively accuse them of having affairs with her husband. Arthur didn't know where to hide. He was an honest, hard-working man in his 60s who just wanted to walk in the woods, now being pointed at and pied by everyone he knew. The humiliation was so absolute that he had to leave the pub, eventually sitting alone on a park bench in the dark, crying. When he finally gathered the courage, he called his son. His last words still echo in my head. "Son, today I have decided to divorce your mother. Please forgive me for bringing you this kind of grief at my age." Alex dropped his phone on the rug and collapsed into the couch cushions. I sat next to him and wrapped my arms around his shoulders. All he had managed to say was, "Don't worry, Dad, we'll take care of everything." And then he buried his face in my lap, weeping quietly. I stroked his hair, saying nothing. In a moment like that, words of comfort are useless. But even with the family completely ablaze, Catherine and Brittany did not regain their sanity. As soon as Arthur handed her the divorce papers, the two of them showed up at our house. Catherine started screaming at the top of her lungs on our front porch, claiming Arthur wanted a divorce because he had gotten another woman pregnant and was moving in with her. Brittany stood on our lawn with her arms crossed, looking at me with pure disgust, declaring that Alex was only taking his dad's side because I had brainwashed him. I made sure Lily was asleep in her room and stood in the doorway watching their circus act. I will never forget the image of Alex stepping directly in front of me, spreading his arms wide to physically block them from getting near me. A few days later, we packed up Arthur's essentials, some clothes, his hiking gear, a few photo albums, and rented him a small, cozy one-bedroom apartment. As he looked out the window of his new place, he offered a smile that was half relief, half devastation. I had to hide in his tiny galley kitchen to wipe away my own tears. After the separation and after we had practically cut all ties, Catherine doubled down. One day, she changed her WhatsApp profile picture to a selfie of her and Brittany, surrounded by Saks Fifth Avenue shopping bags, grinning wildly. Her status read, "The real family are the ones who stay." I showed the photo to Alex and let out a bitter laugh. He glanced at the screen, let out an ironic chuckle and said, "They'll tire themselves out." I nodded. But deep in my heart, that dark shadow of anxiety crept back in. I knew instinctively that her brand of crazy wasn't just going to go to sleep that easily. And I wasn't wrong. The absolute catastrophe would catch up to me shortly after at the worst possible moment. Seasons passed. A bitter winter arrived in Seattle. During those months, Alex and I were finally able to breathe. He focused on a massive audit at work, and I started transitioning back into the office full-time. On weekends, we'd take Lily to Arthur's apartment. We'd stock his fridge with Tupperware meals and take walks through Discovery Park. Seeing my father-in-law crunching through the frost-covered leaves, holding his granddaughter's hand, made us immensely happy. I felt like we had finally found our sanctuary. But fate is cruel. The peace was shattered the day Brittany's wedding invitation arrived in the mail. She had decided to rush into a marriage with some guy from out of state, probably hoping to guilt her brother into coughing up that promised $25,000 gift. When I pulled the thick envelope out of the mailbox, a chill ran through me before I even opened it. Alex looked at it, sighed heavily, and forced a smile. She's still my sister. We'll have to go and show our faces for an hour. That forced smile broke my heart so much. I stuck the invitation to the fridge, but I actively avoided looking at it. Just knowing I'd have to see Catherine's face at the reception suffocated me. Just imagining the scene she would cause when we walked in made my stomach tie into knots. I went days without sleeping. I'd wake up at 3 a.m., drink a glass of water, and just stare at the ceiling. Alex would try to calm me down. I will be glued to your side. I won't let her anywhere near you. I promise. We go in, fulfill our obligation, and leave. I nodded, but the heavy stone on my chest didn't lift. That infamous female intuition was screaming at me that something was going to go horribly wrong. The night before the wedding, after putting Lily to bed and steaming the dress I was going to wear, I was on the couch drinking chamomile tea with Alex. It was past 11 p.m. when I started feeling a dull ache in my lower abdomen. I figured dinner had just sat wrong, so I took some Pepto-Bismol before getting into bed. But within half an hour, the lower right side of my stomach felt like it was on fire, like someone was stabbing me from the inside and violently twisting the knife. I kicked the sheets onto the floor and curled into a tight fetal position, biting my lip to hold back the groans. Alex woke up, panicked, and rubbed my back. I was already drenched in a cold sweat. "What's wrong, baby?" "Where does it hurt?" he asked, terrified. "My stomach, right side. I can't breathe." I managed to gasp out. The waves of pain were hitting me so hard that within minutes my face was as white as paper. Alex immediately dialed 911. We asked our next-door neighbor to come sit with a sleeping Lily, and the paramedics loaded me into the ambulance. During the ride, I gripped Alex's hand, grinding my teeth. The wail of the siren felt like it was miles away. When we got to the ER at Seattle General, they rushed me through a CT scan. The surgeon looked at the imaging, traded a grim look with Alex, and laid it out. "It's acute appendicitis, and it's severely inflamed. We have to do an emergency open appendectomy right now." If we had waited an hour longer, we'd be looking at a ruptured appendix and full-blown peritonitis. I watched Alex sign the anesthesia consent forms with a violently shaking hand. I tried to cheer him up, whispering weakly, "Hey, you know what they say, a bad penny always turns up." Trying to joke, but he just stroked my forehead. His eyes bloodshot and teary. The surgery was scheduled for the crack of dawn. Coincidentally, Brittany's wedding ceremony was set for 11 a.m. that exact same day. It must have been around 5 a.m. When being wheeled on the gurney toward the O, I grabbed Alex's hand and pleaded with him. "Honey, go to the wedding. If neither of us shows up, your mother is going to cause a massive scene and tell everyone we faked this to ruin Brittany's day. Go make an appearance and shut down the gossip." He flat out refused, saying his wife was about to get her stomach cut open and he wasn't leaving the hospital under any circumstances. But I was inflexible. I absolutely refused to give his toxic family any ammunition to attack us with in the future. Alex closed his eyes, pressed his forehead against mine, and finally gave in. "I'll go for 20 minutes and run right back." They wheeled me into the O, placed the mask over my face, and told me to count backwards from 10. I didn't make it to 7. When I woke up in the recovery wing, the ceiling tiles were blurry, but the pain was beyond anything words can describe. I felt a searing line of liquid fire running from my belly button down to my pelvis, like claws trying to rip my skin open from the inside. It was the surgical incision waking up as the anesthesia wore off. I pressed the morphine drip button like a maniac, but the pain wouldn't recede and tears leaked silently from my eyes. They moved me to a semi-private room. I couldn't move a single muscle. Taking a deep breath pulled violently on my stitches, so I took shallow, panicked little breaths. Sunlight was streaming through the blinds, but I could only stare at the blank wall, listening to the hospital sounds. Nurses chatting in the hall, the woman in the bed next to me eating ice chips. Everything felt miles away. I had no idea what time it was. I was just fighting a war against the pain. Suddenly, the door to the hospital room burst open. Alex rushed in. His tie was undone, his suit was wrinkled, his face was flushed red, and he was sweating profusely. It was obvious he had bolted from the reception, probably tossing the gift envelope on a table and sprinting to his car. He dropped to his knees next to my bed and wiped the sweat from my forehead. His hands were shaking. I smiled as best I could and whispered, "You came. Oh baby, how are you? You're so pale. It's over now. I'm here," he said out of breath. His dress shirt was soaked through at the underarms. He didn't mention a word about the wedding. He just said he needed to splash some cold water on his face and stepped into the small adjoining bathroom. I heard the faucet turn on and closed my eyes, trying to let the sound of running water relax me. Not even 5 minutes had passed when the heavy wooden door of the hospital room was slammed open with such brutal force it nearly ripped off its hinges. My eyes flew open in terror. When I turned my head, my heart completely stopped. Standing in the doorway was Catherine. She was wearing an absurdly expensive flashy mother of the bride gown, topped with a massive, ridiculous fascinator hat. Her makeup was flawless, and she was glaring at me with eyes completely injected with blood. She had come straight from the reception. She marched toward my bed, her high heels clicking loudly against the linoleum. She gripped the metal bedrail and loomed over me with an expression that barely looked human. Every ounce of resentment, the bitterness over the divorce, the canceled $25,000, and whatever gossip had happened at the wedding, it was all condensed into that pitch black stare. The first sentence that hissed through her clenched teeth is burned into my brain forever. "You staged this little theater act and sliced your own belly open just to skip my only daughter's wedding. Where did you get so much evil in you? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had just been gutted like a fish on an operating table, and she was calling me an actress." My freshly sutured wound throbbed viciously beneath the thin hospital sheet. Tears spilled down my cheeks, and I could only stare up at her, totally paralyzed. I tried to scream, but any movement cut off my air supply. I fumbled for the nurse call button, but it was dangling off the opposite side of the bed. In that split second, through my blurred vision, I saw my mother-in-law raise her hand. I squeezed my eyes shut by reflex, expecting a slap, but she didn't slap me. She grabbed a fistful of my hair with all her strength. My head jerked, the IV tubing pulled taut, and I felt the needle tear into the vein on the back of my hand. I let out a choked, agonizing gasp, but the real gates of hell opened right after. With her free hand, she violently ripped my blanket down. And then, with an open palm, she dropped her entire body weight directly onto my freshly stitched abdominal incision. That a human being could do something like that to another person was inconceivable to me. I felt like everything inside my stomach was going to explode. Every muscle in my body seized from the impact of a pain so blinding, so astronomical that I don't have the English vocabulary to describe it. Without realizing it, a guttural, animalistic scream ripped out of my throat. It was a shriek so primitive and horrifying that the woman in the bed next to me jumped out of her mattress in pure terror. That desperate scream pierced through the walls and echoed into the bathroom. The sound of the sink water cut off instantly. The bathroom door flew open, smashing into the wall. Alex sprinted out, his hands still dripping wet, his shirt half unbuttoned. When his eyes registered the scene, his mother, dressed in extravagant wedding attire, pulling me by the hair and crushing her hand into my open surgical wound, his eyes glazed over with pure, feral madness. The sound that erupted from my husband's chest wasn't human. It was the roar of a wild animal defending its wounded mate, a bellow that rattled the medical monitors. In 2 massive strides, he crossed the room, grabbed his mother by the wrist, and violently ripped her hand off my stomach. Simultaneously, with his other hand, he grabbed his own mother by the hair in the exact same manner she had been holding mine, and yanked her head backward with terrifying, ruthless force. "What? What are you doing, you crazy bastard?" My mother-in-law shrieked. Alex shoved her backward, baring his teeth and spit a sentence into her face that I will never forget. Feel the exact same damn pain my wife is feeling. Maintaining his brutal grip on her hair, he dragged her away from my bed and threw her with zero hesitation onto the hard hospital floor. Her ridiculous fascinator hat flew through the air, and she hit the linoleum with a heavy thud. I could barely comprehend that this was real life. My mother-in-law sprawled on the floor, brushed her messy hair out of her face, pushed herself up on her hands, and screamed at him. "You piece of trash. Doing this to your own mother? God will punish you." Alex towered over her. In his eyes, there was not a single trace of filial love left. Every ounce of mercy had evaporated. All that remained was the primal instinct to protect his wife. With an icy, D-Dayed calmness, Alex handed down his final sentence. "As of today, you are not my mother. Do not ever dare to show your face in my life again." Catherine's breath caught in her throat. As she opened her mouth like a fish out of water to respond, heavy footsteps hammered down the hallway. The floor nurse, alerted by the screaming, froze in the doorway. Trembling, she stuttered, I'm calling hospital security." But Alex snapped his head toward her and barked. "Don't call security. Call 911. Call the Seattle police. This is an attempted homicide." As the nurse fumbled for her phone, I watched Alex pull out his own cell phone to call the cops himself. His tone of voice was astonishingly steady. He gave the dispatcher the hospital name and room number with perfect diction, coldly reporting that his mother had just physically assaulted his wife's fresh surgical wound. Meanwhile, tears were streaming down my face from the unbearable physical agony. But ironically, in the midst of that sheer torture, I felt a profound spiritual catharsis. The demon that had been eating away at us for years had just been cast down to the floor by the hands of my own husband. He had kept the promise he made on that rainy night. He was my absolute shield, and that realization filled my heart faster than any IV painkiller could. The attending doctor rushed in and pulled the sheet back with extreme caution to examine my abdomen. I shook violently at the slightest touch. He confirmed that the exterior sutures had held, but ordered an immediate ultrasound to check for internal hemorrhaging. Catherine was still hurling insults at her son from the floor, but her yelling had absolutely zero power over me anymore. Alex came back to my side and grabbed my hand. He was freezing cold, but completely solid. He rested his forehead against mine and whispered, "Forgive me, I got here too late. I swear to you, she will never get near you again." The wail of police sirens echoed near the ambulance bay, and shortly after, the crackle of police radios sounded in the hallway. Catherine was still screaming that we were ungrateful monsters. But the patients and families peeking out of their rooms just stared at her with absolute unadulterated disgust. No one lifted a finger to help her off the floor. The woman in the bed next to me looked at me with deep pity and muttered, "My God, what an absolute savage." I just thanked her with a weak glance. The ultrasound confirmed there was no severe internal tearing, though the pain remained astronomical. 2 SPD officers walked into the room. Alex, without hesitating for a fraction of a second, laid out the facts that his wife had just gotten out of surgery, that his mother burst in during the 5 minutes he was in the restroom, that she pulled my hair and crushed my incision, and that he physically intervened to stop her. He explicitly stated he was pressing charges for assault and battery. We had to expose my wound for one of the officers to take evidentiary photos. I closed my eyes, enduring those humiliating seconds. The officer explained the procedure to file the formal report and request the security footage from the hallway cameras. Alex didn't flinch. Meanwhile, the other cop hauled Catherine up by her arm. She tried to yank herself free, putting on a sweet voice, claiming it was just a silly family misunderstanding, but the officer firmly read her Miranda rights. Catherine's face went chalk white as she realized this wasn't a domestic squabble she could talk her way out of. She was Joffrey's nid. Son! Son! She pleaded, reaching a trembling hand out toward Alex. He didn't even blink. He turned his back to her completely and focused on dabbing the sweat off my forehead with a tissue. Catherine stared at his immovable back, utterly stunned. Click! Click! The metallic sound of handcuffs locking around her wrists cut through the room. I watched the entire scene without blinking in her ruined designer dress, her mascara running down her cheeks, flanked by 2 police officers. My mother-in-law walked out of the hospital room. Seeing the absolute ruin of the woman who had made my life a living hell didn't bring me joy. I only felt a heavy sadness for the dark pit she had willingly thrown herself into. A little while later, Alex's phone buzzed. It was Brittany. Alex put it on speaker and his sister's shrill voice flooded the room. "Alex, what the hell are you doing? It's my wedding day. Someone just told me Mom is at the precinct." Alex responded, his voice like dry ice. "Yeah, your mother just tried to rip open my wife's stitched-up stomach. That's why she's in a holding cell." There was a stunned, heavy silence. Then she started screaming hysterically and he hung up. A few hours later, Brittany, red as a tomato, stormed into my hospital room. I was doing a little better by then, propped up on some pillows. She immediately started threatening us. "How could you put Mom in jail? Do you want us to literally never speak again?" Alex, leaning against the windowsill with his arms crossed, delivered the final verdict. "It's not that we don't want to see you again. It's that we are never seeing you again. And yeah, obviously don't even dream about that 25 grand for your wedding." In that exact second, Brittany's face morphed in a truly fascinating way. She stopped glaring at her brother with hatred. The moment she heard the word grand, her eyes darted back and forth. Her tone instantly shifted into one of humiliating desperation. "Alex, I'm begging you. I'll make Mom apologize on her knees. I swear, just please give me the money." Under the blankets, I had to cover my mouth so I wouldn't laugh at how pathetic the situation was. In reality, we knew Catherine was sitting in an interrogation room refusing to apologize, probably claiming that teaching a daughter-in-law respect wasn't a felony. Realizing that her mother's psychotic break had just cost her $25,000. Brittany's face darkened, and what she did next was legendary. She dropped to her knees right next to my hospital bed, clasped her hands together in prayer and begged me, "Emily, sister, I am so sorry. I am so sorry. I need that money to pay the caterer. The contracts are signed. I'll sign whatever you want. I won't ask Dad for a single dime of his retirement money, ever again. I swear to God. Please just give me the money. I will personally cut my mother out of my life. I promise. Please." I stared down at a person who was entirely capable of selling her own mother down the river for a stack of cash. I saw firsthand just how deeply greed could rot a human soul. Alex stepped forward and said, "If you'd sell your own mother out today for cash, you'll sell me out tomorrow. Get the hell out of here." Now, when she tried to grab his pant leg, he shoved her toward the door and kicked her out. When the heavy door clicked shut, Alex and I looked at each other and let out a dry, exhausted, but incredibly freeing laugh. Those people belonged to a completely different world, and we were finally, permanently out of it. Alex took out his phone, deleted his mother and sister's contacts, blocked their numbers, blocked them on social media, tossed the phone onto the bed and let out a massive sigh. He looked like he had just dropped a 200-lb weight off his shoulders. 2 days later, I started physical therapy, taking tiny, shuffling steps around the room. Alex held my arm securely. Right then, there was a soft knock on the door. It was my father-in-law, Arthur, wearing a humble fleece sweater, holding a thermos of homemade chicken noodle soup. The second our eyes met, the poor man broke down. He walked toward us, thick tears rolling down his weathered cheeks. "Forgive me, honey. I was a coward. I should have cut her off at the root years ago. And because of me, you ended up in this bed," he sobbed. I squeezed his hand, guided him to sit on the edge of the mattress, and told him through the lump in my throat, You are not to blame for any of this. Absolutely none of it." Alex pulled his father into a tight hug, and the 2 grown men cried together. Seeing a father and son holding each other up in the afternoon, light made me understand from the very bottom of my soul what a true family actually is. It's not about sharing blood. It's about sharing the weight of someone else's pain. Arthur spoon-fed me the warm chicken soup while I cried quietly, stroking my hair and whispering, It's over now, sweetheart. It's all over. My recovery was miraculously fast. Alex took his vacation time, transitioned to remote work, and didn't leave my side for a single second. A week later, I finally went home. Lily came sprinting down the hallway, screaming, "Mommy!" I couldn't pick her up because of my stitches, but Alex scooped her up, and the three of us pressed our cheeks together in a tight hug. That moment erased every ounce of suffering from the previous years. Over time, rumors reached us about the absolute mud pit those two women had sunk into. During the legal fallout, Brittany relentlessly harassed her mother over the lost wedding money, blaming her for ruining her life. Although Catherine received a fair settlement from the divorce, her toxic pride led her to blow her half of the savings on extravagant lawyers trying to destroy Arthur and funding a lavish lifestyle she could no longer afford. Desperate to keep up appearances and pay for her daughter's luxury honeymoon, she ended up going to predatory payday lenders or cover the exorbitant interest rates. She drowned in debt. Her credit score was annihilated, and her phone rang constantly with threats from debt collectors. One weekend, while we were having dinner at Arthur's apartment, Alex received a call from a blocked number. He put it on speaker. It was his mother sobbing uncontrollably. "Alex, my boy, please just pay my loan installment this month. Please, just this 1 month." Alex didn't even blink. "Ma'am, don't cry to me. Go ask your beloved daughter for the money. The one you took the loans out for. Leave me alone." He hung up and without missing a beat went back to eating his beef stew. Arthur looked at him across the table and said softly, "Well done, son." That night, back at our house, after tucking Lily into bed, Alex held me on the couch and whispered, "From now on, it's just the four of us. You, me, the kid, and my dad." I nodded in silence. The house was completely still. The glow from the living room lamp was warm, and I could hear the faint rhythmic breathing of my daughter on the baby monitor. This was the life I had fought so fiercely to protect. Eventually, my mother-in-law had to file for bankruptcy. And Brittany, after bleeding her mother dry of whatever cash she could get, completely cut ties with her so she wouldn't get dragged down by the debt collectors. They betrayed each other and sank completely alone into the misery they had built with their own hands. Meanwhile, my father-in-law still drives up to the Cascades every weekend with his buddies, healthy and happy, and takes his granddaughter to the park on Tuesday afternoons. My husband kept the promise he made to me on that stormy night, putting everything on the line to defend me. And I learned a vital truth. Toxic ambition and a desperate need for control will ultimately destroy the people who wield them. Today, when I set 4 plates on the dining table for dinner, I close my eyes and give thanks. Thank you for defending me. Thank you for not giving up, and thank you for this infinite peace that after surviving hell, I will never ever take for granted.